Hi there, I am Stacy Phillips, and I am so excited to kick off my podcast, Stacy Phillips and Friends. Each week, we will step into my wardrobe, literally one of my closets, where one of my nearest and dearest friends and confidants will fill this chair next to me as my co-host to chat a little bit about life and a lot about women empowering women. Together, we will have a gap session with just us gal pals, a deep dive for the dish, a convo among co-eds, and then our big feature presentation, the special guest interview, or what I call the SGI. So welcome to Stacy Phillips and Friends. Let's keep it real. So we have another fascinating guest waiting to speak with us. So let's bring in FBI profiler, best-selling author, really a great book, Jana Monroe,
Oh my
dear
God.
friend of mine. I mean, just look at her. If anybody saw her on the street, they would make an assumption that she was this gorgeous trophy wife,
Absolutely.
having no clue that Jodie Foster created her role based on Jana. And so,
she's
Jana,
beautiful.
say hi, and then I want to delve into some of my
Stacy,
favorite
yeah.
stories of your career.
Hi, but thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I want your hair. I
Oh.
want your eyes.
I think the two things that you match on. I don't.
Yeah.
So Jana's been all over the country in different roles for the FBI and then the police force before that. There are probably three stories since I speak in threes, but one dovetails into the other, where you were being interviewed, I think, by a tennis player from Princeton.
Okay, so I was applying for the behavioral science unit, which is now called the behavioral analysis unit, but I'm going to refer to it as behavioral science. And so I had worked with that. They're in Quantico, Virginia, and I had recently transferred from Tampa, Florida, where I was an agent. And one of the
No, a special agent.
special agent, that's correct. So I was a special agent. And so he said, hey, we have an opening in the behavioral science unit, and we don't advertise this in the FBI, which is very, all postings or job postings were advertised. This was not. So he said, you come down and interview. So I did. And originally it was like a typical interview. And the unit chief, John Douglas, who was a great guy, he was behind his desk with another special agent. And they were asking me questions like, why do you want this position? What do you bring to the, what's your skill set, blah, blah, blah. Then John takes like 5 8x10 very grisly, bloody crime scene photos and just pushes them across the desk to me. And I'm looking at them, and then it's awkward. It's uncomfortable because he's not asking me anything. And I said, well, what do you want me to do with this? And he said, I'm observing you. And I said, I know, but it's kind of creepy. What for? He said, well, we've interviewed a few other women in the past, and they either gasped or shuddered, or they were freaked out by the photos. So I was seeing if you were going to faint or do something. And I said, well, that, I took the liberty of looking you up. This is before the internet. And I said, you were a tennis instructor in the military before becoming an FBI agent. And I had been a police officer and a probation officer and actually worked on some homicide cases. What makes you more qualified for this job than me? And in retrospect, I am not at all recommending you say that in a job interview. That is how not to get a job. However, he laughed a little bit and said, fair enough. And he invited me to a consultation that day. And so I got lost for like an hour and a half, and he made it very clear it was 3 homicide cases, and the detectives and police officers who worked on them from 3 different jurisdictions were all there to present. And John says, you sit in the back row. Sit in the back row, not at the table, and don't say a word. Got it. Well, this is kind of a good lesson not to take a power nap or snooze or do anything when you're in the room, but not really included. You don't have a seat at the table. They were going over the case. And then the last part that they were not agreeing on were symmetrical markings under the breasts of all 3 women and trying to make that linkage. And they said, maybe it was post-mortem activity. There's no blood that was for here. Maybe it was this. So John goes, Jana, what do you think? So I get up, I look at it, and my first impression was, oh, it's like from an underwire bra, like at the end of either heavy-breasted or the end of the day when it's hot.
Yeah,
You're going to have those marks underneath there. I mean, I've spoken to other women. That would be their first inclination. You don't have to be a profiler, but they were like, oh, okay. And that's what it turned out to be. So to John's credit, even though my interview was a little aggressive on that, he did hire me.
So speaking of hiring, my other favorite story, and before we went on air, I showed Jana my shoes because it's the shoe
Great.
story. Now, how do I know all this? Jana came to speak at our Adopter Center program in 2023 to young kids. I went to a book signing of hers, and I've read her book. So I could tell you the stories, and these are three of my favorites. So talk about your polka dot shoes and your little pocket handkerchief and nabbing the perp.
I can't
Okay.
wait to hear this one.
Yeah, well, Linda, so I have always worn high heels. It's not a show off sort of a thing. And I know you two understand that, right? It's a part of your outfit. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what you
Yeah.
do. And especially
Right.
going back when you're wearing, they used to call them power suits, whatever, a form fitted, silhouetted suit. And I would wear 3 to 4 inch heels with them. Well, of course, agents didn't do that. And so I got called into the SAC's special agent in charge, the special agent in charge of the entire office. And it was the day I thought I was looking pretty spiffy. I had on a black suit with a kerchief that was black and white polka dot, and my shoes were black and white polka dot. Well, he was very upset about that. He said that agents don't dress like that. And I said, "Oh, where does it say that?" The FBI, as you can imagine, is very structured and very regulatory driven with its rules and regs.
Right.
So he said, well,
Right.
he got a little frustrated. He goes, "I don't know where it says that, but I've never seen, we don't have any agents that do that." I said, "Well, I'm the first female you've had on the squad, so I don't think the males would wear that." Well, that made him mad. So he said, "You're going to go home and I'm going to dock you your pay. And you're going to change your shoes, and then you're going to come back." Anyway, I said, "With all due respect, I'm not doing that because I can perform my duties in these shoes." Anyway, I'll spare you the rest of the conversation. Fast forward 3 days later, they had a bank robbery, and I'm on the squad with 4 different guys that were there that day. 3 of us respond to the bank robbery, and it wasn't really hard to figure out who the bank robber was. He was fleeing the scene, a guy wearing white with red smoke coming out of him. Do you know what a dye pack is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he had a dye pack from the
Absolutely.
bank that the teller had been wise enough to give him, and it exploded as he was running down the street. So we followed him in the car. He darts down an alley. The car wouldn't fit down there. So in the heat of the moment, I get out of the car. And this is kind of funny now. My 2 fellow agents seemed ancient to me. They had to be like 45. But anyway, I kicked off my shoes and I ran after him. And the guy turned a corner and then he's starting to climb a chain link fence. I can't exaggerate. He really was not very fast. So it wasn't big of a deal. But I pulled him off the fence, got the handcuffs on him just as my 2 counterparts were coming around the corner. Well, the FBI does not have a detention center, so we had to take him to the local jail, the sheriff. We get there and I realize I'm not wearing any shoes. And I'm like, "Oh my, okay, I can't go to the office without my shoes on. We need to go back to the bank." So we go there, my shoes are gone. And I'm like, "Oh dear, okay." And mainly my concern was I had spent too much money on the shoes, and Dale, my husband, Dale Monroe, I was going to have to confess because I was going to replace them. They were my favorite.
Yeah.
Anyway, I get to the office and they're sitting on my desk, agent humor. Ha ha ha. We took your shoes. The good part about it was the 2 agents that I had been with went in. So they did what we call my bidding for me. They went into the special agent in charge and said, "Leave her alone. Back off the shoes bit. She's the one," it sounds like to you, "that made the caller. She made the arrest.
Yeah. Yeah.
She figured it out herself. She doesn't run in the shoes. She takes them off, then she puts them back on. I know we don't do that, but she's different. So just leave her alone." So that meant the
Well
world to me.
done.
That was kind of my day, the pivotal moment to starting to be accepted.
And being a gorgeous blonde, I'm
Yeah.
sure didn't help the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
No, actually it didn't. And, it was a different culture, a different time then. And I think that's always
Yeah.
significant to remember when people are telling stories or looking back, to not look at it through the lens of 2025, or a certain thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
things were a little bit different.
I remember when I started after business school at Nestle in corporate marketing, they send you out on the sales force for 6 months
Oh,
before they
wow.
allow you into corporate headquarters as part of. It's smart,
Yeah.
right? For a lot of reasons. So the sales force was 99% male. And women typically were the marketers in those days, and they resented that the women came and we made more money than they did. We had more power. They were not happy with any of that. So but I did know in terms of them playing some of the teasing jokes and like putting the
Yes.
shoes on the,
Yeah.
okay. At first I was insulted by some of the things they did, but I realized that initially they did nothing unusual to me, and they were picking on all of their peers.
Yes.
When they finally did something like that to me, I knew they had accepted me. And that I
Linda,
was
that's
one of the
exactly
team.
what I'm talking about. It's almost, I can make it
Yeah.
almost analogous to sibling rivalry, right? Like they can call each other
Yeah.
names or whatever, but you as the next door neighbor better not do that. And I realized that too. And they realized I could handle it. And come on, some of the prankish things, I'm thinking like, are we 10? But
Yeah.
they thought it was funny. So, okay.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we went on air,
Mhm.
Jana and I were talking about how I just went to London with a beautiful blonde,
Mhm.
6 foot tall woman, FBI special agent. And my guess is that is much more recent now that women in general, and certainly beautiful women in general, that's just a guess.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the woman you were talking about is also married to a special agent that came up the ranks, and I believe Dale and I were only the second couple in the bureau, and they looked at us like, what do we do with these people? It was really there were no rules and regulations to look up in a notebook, and it was, of course, you
Yeah.
can't be on the same squad, you can't be in the chain of command. It's more prevalent now, and it's not like such an anomaly, but it's still not commonplace.
One of the things that Bernadette taught me is that when one of the spouses gets transferred and the other spouse goes with, you take a demotion.
Typically, you
Did you
do.
know that?
Now, Dale and I did not. Dale, my husband, because after I got out of the behavioral science unit, I started to go up the ranks in the bureau, leadership ranks. He stayed tactical. He was on the hostage rescue team at Quantico, and then he was the SWAT commander in 3 separate offices. So those chains are separate, and he had such excellent tactical skills. It would have been foolish to demote him on something like that. So he didn't go through that experience.
And I can figure out the reasoning for it, but I'm not so sure it's wise. If you should apply and get the best job for your skills, whatever it is. It could be a promotion, it could be stagnant, it could be a demotion.
I totally agree with you. That was one of those things. Sometimes, when rules or regs or policies don't make any sense, it's really frustrating. And that's one of them, I think, that should have. And if it's still in existence, which you say it is, that should definitely be changed, because there's always a need when you look at how many field offices there are for skill sets. And so I think it should be rewarded, not, demotion, not a demotion.
Yeah. So what are you up to now? I know the answer, but for those of us listening.
Well, a couple of things. One, I'm doing what I'm passionate about, and you talked about speaking to, underserved youth and giving back. I love that. That is a passion of mine. So I've been able to use my book, if you will, as a platform for public speaking engagements, and I like to focus on doing that to encourage young women and men. I'm not exclusively, but women predominantly who need that support, that encouragement, that look at, you don't have to have come from this kind of a background or that to pursue what you want to do. And I love that. That's giving back to me. And I've actually been approached about doing a podcast with a host sort of thing. And that's a whole new world for me. So I'm just researching. I'm not sure what that would look like.
You're practicing with us.
Yeah.
That would be so incredible, because the people that are doing that now don't have anything close to your background.
You think
Now,
it'd be a
I
good idea?
understand that. Oh my gosh. I think so. By the way, I understand that 75% of the audience that watch or listen to podcasts and other kinds of true crime, shows are women.
You know what?
Do you?
So I'm going to remove the podcast piece of it, but these stats
Yeah,
that I had from like 2 weeks ago for watching all the different TV shows and the reading and
Yeah.
the whole thing was
All kinds of true crime
88%.
documentaries.
Yeah, 88%.
Wow.
And that's one of the
You have
things
a
of
more
the few men that
updated
were
study.
sitting in the
Yeah.
audience. This was at the FBI Citizens Academy Alumni Group last week in Houston. And I'm saying,
Yeah.
okay, man, watch out. If you're here, the spouses are all reading these books at midnight and then looking over at you. So, keep your
Yeah.
eyes open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So The podcasts that you have seen, or any sort of media for true crime, on serial killers, for example, how accurate are they?
That's kind of a general thing. The thing that concerns me, and that's one of the reasons I did write the book. I didn't think there was a market for it. I'm kind of private, and I thought, gee, the market is saturated with true crime things. And my publicist and publisher said, "Oh, you're quite wrong." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
plus, I didn't have to do any research. I'm copious note taker. I had all of my notes. So when we were going through the approval process with FBI headquarters, I was fortunate to have all kinds of documents to show them, and blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to also write something that was very accurate. And if someone questioned it, I could say, well, here, this was my experience, and this is what happened at this point. I think some of them, and this is always a concern, are prone to a little exaggeration. I think that we all have stories. I mean, our lives, right? Our lives are stories. And I think storytelling and sharing with one another is fabulous. But if you're going to exaggerate or do some other, then it goes into the fiction category, not true crime.
Yeah.
So that's a
Yeah.
concern of mine that I know only a little about, because I've heard people that I've been aware of or cases that I've actually worked on, and I'm thinking, no, it didn't quite happen like that.
Kind of the glamorization of the quote documentaries about Dahmer or some of the other serial killers that I know you've had personal
Yeah.
experience with.
And my concern, that's the other thing, and my dedication to the book was the too many victims of violent crime, and for the loved ones that grieve their loss. As we all know, whether it's a homicide or a death, it's not just the person or the victim. It's their spouse, their loved ones, their children, their good friends, the community who they've touched. It's a ripple effect of impacting others. And the sensationalism, people know the name of Bundy, Dahmer, Kemper, who they didn't for a while, which sounds weird. He was my favorite serial killer, and he's still alive. And by favorite I mean because his behavior was so fascinating. I have no affinity for serial killers. But people have that kind of name recognition and notoriety, but of course not with the victims. And so although we can't change that culturally, like, here's all the victims, I wanted to make sure that people were aware that they were real people who certainly did not warrant what happened to them, and not to glorify the serial. It's one thing to be interested, compelled and repulsed by the subject matter, but don't glamorize it.
So I mentioned a few minutes ago that Jodie Foster basically took her inspiration from you when filling her role in Silence of the Lambs. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, meeting with her?
Well, for me, it was a real positive experience. She, I was going to say is, I'm sure she still is, very professional, knew what, her script, knew what she was doing. And she and I would sit in either my office or John Douglas's office, because it was a bigger one, and discuss the script. And she would say things like, it says that Clarice here is supposed to say X, Y, and Z. Would you say that? And depending on what it was, I'd either say yes or no. And if it was a no, I said, these are the words that would make more sense. Or in law enforcement, nobody would say something like that. They'd say something like this. I had no influence, of course, but she did, and was, able to change a few of the things in the way that she approached them after we'd had some. People say you trained her. I didn't train her in anything. I advised her. So it was a very positive experience.
You inspired her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd have to ask her that, but it was, she
did a really good job, and it seemed really accurate to me.
Yeah, and when in the beginning of the movie, she runs the Yellow Brick Road, which is actually a Marine Corps obstacle course, but the agents run it also. And it's not easy, as you can imagine. It's designed for young Marine Corps men, but we all do it. She was out there, we were there, and she had her assistant, and she said, get my double to do this. And I said, well, why? I said, you're younger than I am, and you're in good shape. I said, just have our PT, physical training, special agent show you how to do it. There's, techniques that you do to climbing over the net, and you don't have to fall down. And I said, and she did it. And of course, in the movie, they don't show the whole thing. That'd be boring. But, she did it. I thought that was fantastic.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So recently, the FBI has come under attack by the executive branch, and without making the show about politics.
No.
Do you worry about the agency's reputation and the special agents' morale?
I've been worried about it for about 9 years. So it's not a new worry. It's now switched trajectory. And I'll say something for a little about being current. I had the great honor throughout my career to mentor a lot of people. And now these mentees are in leadership positions. It's been that kind of time, supervisors, assistant special agent in charge. So I do a lot of either if we're not texting, we'll actually schedule phone calls and talk about that. And yeah, it's really right now, things are really, I don't want to say ambiguous, but in the seat of change right now. The things that concern me are the morale of the agents who I know, and let's just say some of them have never even been to headquarters, FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., except on a field trip when they were in training, right? So there is no daily
Or in
contact.
school,
Yeah,
growing up.
absolutely. So they are hardworking, ethical, dedicated agents that it's hard to pretend that you're not seeing negative things or hearing negative things. So it's then the job of the supervisors and the leader of the office to say, okay, keep focused on the mission, pay no attention, feel like the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. We just keep doing what we're doing. So I think this is kind of a bumpy road right now. I think this is just me speaking, but I think the FBI would be extremely wise to focus on that mission and publicly, anyway, completely stay out of the political arena. When we were in the FBI, it was forbidden to discuss politics. Some of our closest friends, we have no idea if they're conservative, liberal, nothing, because it was not a part of our job. Part of that, when you look at behavior, we can be influenced if, this or that. And we had to conduct interviews and investigations, and we had to do situational awareness things where it's nonverbal communication. You want as little things that are going to influence you in some way to enter it. You need to be as focused as possible on getting the truth, getting answers, and not being influenced by biases. I mean, there's subconscious biases and there's overt ones. And the whole thing about not having politics be a part of it was to not have those, to minimize those.
So do you have any inside Beltway scoops from your mentees who are still in the government that you can share? You can't get in trouble now.
Yeah, I guess I'm glad you mentioned that last part. No, not that I can share. I was very proud of the fact I survived my career without getting in trouble.
So I commented before about special agents. My understanding is that every agent is called a special agent. And
Yes.
will you share with everybody how that came about?
Okay, and I'm only laughing because we all have consternation with this. So J. Edgar Hoover,
I know.
who was the first director and was the director for 50 years. That's why they developed term limit. His thought was, they're a specialist. So they're a special agent in everything. And if you've ever seen the FBI crime classifications, there's I don't know it today currently, but approximately 370. Anything from the Bird Migratory Act to corruption to gangbang to, blah, blah, blah. And the thought was each agent is going to have a specialty and they're going to, they're specializing in all different kinds of things. That why, from the federal standpoint, all of this would be covered. But we always had, when you're knocking at a door or introducing yourself, or when you say you're special agent, the joke used to be, well, what makes you so special, special agent?
So I noticed when you talk, you don't say special agent, you say agent.
Right, because and the reason, and I can't speak for everyone, but in general, most of us don't like that term because of the joking, right? So when we're amongst ourselves, we call each other agents. We never say special agent.
So being a woman, being a beautiful woman, and coming
Thank
up the
you.
ranks, what you did, do you think it was a good place for a woman? And what would it be like for young girls these days? Because I know you speak to young girls.
I do. And when I speak to them, let me answer the second part first. Depending on what they want to know, are they interested in becoming an agent, or they just want to know what it's like? If they are interested in becoming an agent, my first question is why? And if they say something about, the glamour of it or the glitz, well, there used to be a TV show out years ago called The X-Files. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it was
But
about,
I watched the FBI on Sunday nights
okay,
religiously
that's,
when I was growing up.
well, the X-Files, and it was wildly popular, but I would speak to people and they'd say, well, I want to join and I want to do the X-Files. I said, it's make believe. There is no extraterrestrial squad. So if I get something like that where someone really hasn't done their homework, I'll say, come back and talk to me after you've researched it. So once I have what the motivation is and what they are going to be able to withstand, then it's whether I encourage them or say, maybe you might want to look somewhere else. Let's talk about, maybe another opportunity for you. Just for me, when I was in, and I was so determined to go in, I had wanted to do this for years. I'd wanted to be in law enforcement. So for me, some of the, I'll call it hazing, or Linda, like you talked about, the pranksters, the this, the that, it toughened me. It really toughened me. So it was a good thing for me, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah. How about the gruesomeness of what you have to look at in order to find the answers? I was thinking about that, and I feel like I could look at anything to get to the end game.
Right.
But you've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of cases. At some point, what happens? How do you
Sleep at night?
compartmentalize your life so that you can sleep at night?
And that's a great word, compartmentalize. And it wasn't always that way. It was a journey for me. And I look at it like a doctor. I'm not comparing myself to a doctor, but you have to have a sort of clinical detachment. Obviously, a doctor can't go deliver bad news and fall apart to each client, patient. So it was a similar type thing. And my first accident that when I went as a very young police officer, and they're very gory scene, I threw up. It was just it was overwhelming to me.
Right.
And still, when I'm looking at pictures, I can compartmentalize very, very well. It's the smell. It's when you're with a medical examiner, when you're in a morgue, when you're in those kinds of things. So it's all of it. It's sight, smell, sounds. It's all of that come into it. But and for me, the other thing too, I used to be quite a runner. Now I walk a lot. But when things I could feel that would get to me, I'd go out for a run. Just to take my mind somewhere else.
Not in heels.
Well, a few times, but much slower.
But cute
much slower.
sneakers.
Yeah. Cute
But
sneakers.
cute
That's right.
sneakers.
The sneakers have to match whatever you're wearing, of course. So
Absolutely. So, you're young, you're beautiful, you're smart, you're accomplished. What's next for you? At some point, your book as an entree, you're going to be doing something more with that or something else.
Yeah, the public speaking, I'm still very interested in, and right now I'll call it a circuit, and I'm very good at not monetizing things. So I do the FBI, the
I
FBI.
know that well.
Yes, the FBI Citizens Academy. Anybody in law enforcement, I don't charge for that. But I get such it makes me feel great. I like doing that. So that's my own reward to myself, is that I'm doing that. Like I said, maybe this podcast thing, I'm not sure. I'm exploring that, and a TV show that we're kind of taking a look at. But I'm still dabbling in security, more like the corporate type security, doing some work there and helping out some former colleagues of mine. But I also, and I'm studying this because I've never written a novel, and I had some ideas about basing the character on a novel for two reasons. One, you can write like a series, and then I wouldn't have to go through pre-publication review either. If you say it's a novel, and I could base it on real characters and real stories, but if I take just a little bit out or redact some things, then it's in a whole different classification.
Oh, I would read those in a heartbeat.
Thank you. I have an audience of one.
Yeah.
Two.
I know that you did
I
too.
share.
But I would listen to the audio version of it while I was walking.
Yeah.
Or jogging.
Absolutely. And that's why I do have my book on Spotify, because so many people, you don't have time.
I know you do. That's where I got it. I
I haven't.
I can't sign a Spotify book.
This is true. This is true.
Good point.
And I do always I always cognitively remember more when I read it as a book.
But
as
Linda,
opposed to listening to it.
yeah, like everybody
Yeah.
learns differently, right? And remembers differently.
Right,
So I think
right.
it's nice when you have those kind of options. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Jana.
Oh.
Jana Monroe, along with my friend of the longest duration. That's our new thing. She's not my old friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Linda Samuels Victor. So
Pass
join
it
us
on.
again here
Yes.
at
No more old.
youtube.com at
Yes.
Stacy D. Phillips Ask, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Stacy D. Phillips Ask. So we will include links for Jana and Linda in our episode information, but just for those who are listening, could you please tell us where they can find you, Jana?
Basically, it's jdmonroeenterprises.com.
And Linda?
And mine is 323-333-3121.
That's such a
Got
cool
it.
number. You've been listening to Stacy Phillips and Friends, where love is always in fashion.
Oh,
We love
perfect.
you, Jana.